Your book, Why Good Things Happen to Good People, then it at once reminds one of older books which are titled something like Why Bad Things Happen to Good People.
Yes. Well, it is true. There's a saying, no good deed goes unpunished. You've probably heard that at some point. And sometimes that will happen. But ultimately, you have to expand the canvas and enlarge it to the point where you can see how what looks like a very negative moment can become positive. When I define love, I actually draw pretty heavily on the language of a psychiatrist when the well being and security of another is as real or meaningful to you as your own, and sometimes more so, you love that person. There's no ancient language, no Greek, no Latin, nothing like that. But it makes sense. It's commonsensical. And they've asked for advice. They've revealed their hearts, shall we say, to AI. And the AI has some cognitive responses. Well, why don't you think about this? Why don't you think about that? But in the end, 17 of these young people killed themselves because what AI doesn't have is what that toddler has. And what hopefully most of us have, unless we're psychopaths, it has emotional empathy. It has love. And that's what you need. So it's that love that's key. The first chapter is may you give and glow. The second one is may you heal with kindness. The third one is may you follow your callings. We talked about that. The fourth one, may you know the one mind. And it goes on, and may you cherish the gift of nature. May you honor the spirit of freedom.
Namaste, everyone. Today's session is titled Unlimited Love. Our guest speaker is Dr. Stephen Post. Professor Stephen G. Post is one of the world's leading scholars on altruism, love, compassion, and the science of giving. He is a best-selling author, professor of preventive medicine, and founder of the Institute for Research on Pure Unlimited Love, which is based in Cleveland's University Circle, but is active across the US and worldwide. He is currently the director of the Center for Medical Humanities, Compassionate Care, and Bioethics, and professor of Family, Population, and Preventive Medicine at the Stony Brook University School of Medicine, New York. Professor Post's work bridges science, spirituality, and ethics with a mission to understand how unselfish love heals, uplifts, and transforms both individuals and cultures. Post is widely considered the premier American bioethicist and scholar on the relationship between altruism, compassion, and well being in both the recipient and giver. His pioneering book, The Moral Challenge of Alzheimer's Disease, was recognized as a medical classic of the 20th century by the British Medical Journal. His book, Why Good Things Happen to Good People, How to Live a Longer, Healthier, Happier Life by the Simple Act of Giving, was a national bestseller and was awarded first place by World Literacy Canada. His latest book, Pure Unlimited Love, Science, and the Seven Paths to Inner Peace, is a mature statement on giving, well being, inner peace, and spirituality. Today's session will be a conversation with Dr. Sethi. The conversation will be moderated by Dr. Ramesh Bijlani. He is a prolific writer, inspirational speaker, and a spiritual seeker. Dr. Stephen sir, thank you so much for joining. And Dr. Bijlani sir, thank you for taking this conversation forward. Over to you both.
Good
Thank
morning,
you.
and thank you for having me.
And, may I call you Stephen?
Yes, you may.
Stephen, my introduction to you was through this book, Why Good Things Happen to Good People. which I
Okay.
discovered in my daughter's personal library. She's a psychologist working in Connecticut in the US. And right now,
Oh,
actually, I'm speaking from her home. Uh, so uh, it was a serendipity, you might say. I discovered this book and I fell in love with it. It has taken me 2 months to read it. I'm a slow reader, but then I've enjoyed every moment that I've spent on this book. And then, that prompted me to search for you on the internet even before I completed this book, as I wrote to you. And I found that you were very accessible. Your email was so readily available. Normally, to find the emails of celebrities is not so easy. I could just find it so easily, and I wrote to you and I got a very prompt response. So I was so glad, and I'm happy that now you are here on the Yes platform to share your wisdom with all of us. Uh, Before we go further, let me start with something that I discovered from your forthcoming book, Pure Unlimited Love, in which you talked about some incidents from your childhood and youth, which already had started giving clues to how your life might unfold. You're a psychologist, I believe, by qualification, and you're not followed what one might say a psychologist follows in his life a default path. You followed an unconventional path. And uh, people who follow this type of path in their life, uh, I mean, generally it appears arrive in this world prepared for that type of a life. They start giving clues to what might happen, and of course one can understand it only in retrospect, what they might end up doing in future, what their final calling is. So you have shared in this book some such incidents that go back as early as your grade 6 in school. So, would you like to share some anecdotes or some incidents which now makes much more sense in retrospect, that you were probably meant to live a type of life that you have been living for the last 30 or 40 years?
well, thank you. And please thank your daughter for sending you a copy of Why Good Things Happen. Uh, yeah, I do go back a ways. I'm not young anymore, although I'm still a little immature and have silly jokes, and so that makes up for it. But when I was a youngster, especially when I was about 14 or 15, I was up at a high school in New Hampshire, the state of New Hampshire. It was called St. Paul's. It was an Episcopalian high school, and I had a really wonderful dream, which startled me. Uh, and it was a dream that I had early in the morning as I was about to wake up, and it was of a path going to the west. And then on the left of the path, I saw a young man with dirty blonde hair who looked like he was about to jump off some precipice. And then a blue angel came into the dream, just the face of a woman in blue. And she said, "If you save him, you too shall live." And I remembered that very distinctly and talked with my various schoolmates about it. We had a course on ancient history and including Hinduism. And it was a matter of some curiosity. Uh, Eventually, when I was a little older, about 17, I decided that I would follow the dream because it was felt like destiny. So instead of going to a college on the East Coast, I uh, I went west in a broken down gray Mercedes 190 that needed a lot of work, and uh, and it fell apart in the middle of Pennsylvania. So I wound up going all the way out to California that summer, and then up to Reed College. Uh, so I've always felt that somehow or another, my destiny, my calling, if you will, was pretty clear from early on, and I'm grateful for that. So life is a journey. It's not something I've overly planned, but I've been blessed with good fortune. I've met a lot of wonderful people, psychologists, but also at the University of Chicago Divinity School, wonderful scholars in world religions. So I feel really honored to be where I am. Somehow or another, I wound up, I had an interest in the life sciences, but I've wound up teaching in medical schools at the University of Chicago, Ann Arbor, Michigan, 20 years at Case Western in Ohio, and now about 17 years here at Stony Brook in New York. And I've always mixed my work with spirituality in various ways. And people have seen me in that light and been very accepting. And so that's still my work, my mission in life. And I've always worked hard never uh, to be distracted from it. So there's a chapter in Pure Unlimited Love called "May You Follow Your Callings," and you will get distracted. There will be more lucrative offers over here, maybe slightly more prestigious institutions over there. But all you need to do to be at peace is to follow your callings and hopefully have friends who, if you look like you might be getting off course, will remind you of who you are and what you are. So I'm a big believer in the journey of life, and I don't think that I've so much created or made my callings, but I've discovered them on a path, and they've come into my world, and the important thing is to respond favorably to all the unexpected surprises that enter in your path.
Thank you. So it was a dream that through which you discovered your destiny. At least that was one major event. And then after that, it seems you met Sir John Templeton, which played a
Yes.
pivotal role in your life. Maybe now you could talk something about your association with him.
Yeah, sure. So Sir John, who passed away in 2008, he was about 98 at the time. He was a great investor, but he was also a tremendous spiritual figure. In fact, he was known as the Tennessee Mystic on Wall Street. He was a successful advisor, but he was also very much spiritually oriented. And he and I met in about 1990 at a conference on spirituality and health in Virginia, and we just hit it off. He asked me what I thought about love, about agape love, meaning not the love of chocolate or designer jeans, but something that is much deeper, that Hindus understand profoundly. He was a believer in the idea of one mind, of an original one mind, and he believed that our individual minds, although we do have individuality, are never separate from that universal mind. So we're distinct, but not overly so. And he believed that spiritual experiences come when that infinite mind um, breaks into our experience, sometimes in ways that almost feel like an invasion. You have that sense that what you're thinking, what you're doing, isn't coming just from you, but from a larger consciousness. So I love the story of Ramanujan, the Indian mathematician, and the movie that came out in the US, about 12 years ago, called The Man Who Knew Infinity. He was a great mathematician, and he wasn't very well trained in math, but he would go to the foot of his goddess, and he would be inspired, and he would write these formulas in the dirt next to him, and he would come back a little later and he recorded them in a notebook. And somebody from Oxford, a very famous mathematician about 1901 named Littleton, saw one of these formulas that a friend had sent him from India, and he felt, I have to get Ramanujan to Oxford. And Ramanujan came to Oxford, and it was difficult for him because he did not think that he had to actually prove step by step these formulas. He thought they were true. He knew they were true. And he lasted a few years there. It was not an easy experience because of certain elements of racial prejudice and so forth. But now, if you go to Cambridge University, to Trinity College, which is their best college, um, you can go into the library, and right in the middle of the library is a wonderful glass case. And it has the two notebooks of Ramanujan in it. And they are considered by many mathematicians to be the base of quantum physics. And even though he never proved much, he did write one article where he proved one of his formulas. He just knew they were true, and it was a little hard for people to take. But it's an example of how this universal consciousness can work through us in a way that isn't really so much our own, but comes from a much broader source. And I think that's a beautiful account and important. So I love Hinduism. I've been to the Indian Institute for Advanced Studies a number of times. That's in Bangalore. And I have a friend named Prem Watsa who actually owns that airport, which is a great airport. So sure, I mean, I'm a believer in creativity that doesn't just come from us, but that is a gift. And I believe that if we notice this in our consciousness, we can become less self-oriented and recognize that we are really the instruments of a higher purpose. That must be some form of yoga.
Thank you for sharing all these details in association with India and the Hindu tradition. Your book, this Why Good Things Happen to Good People, it's a rather tantalizing title, but then it at once reminds one of older books which are titled something like Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. There is
Yes.
a grain of truth in both. Of course, yours is a very emphatically positive approach. But then, would you like to now share a wider view which may reconcile both these contrasting, if not contradictory approaches to life?
Well, it is true. There's a saying, no good deed goes unpunished. You've probably heard that at some point. And sometimes that will happen. But ultimately, you have to expand the canvas and enlarge it to the point where you can see how what looks like a very negative moment can become positive. So when I came here from Cleveland, which was now 16 years ago, Sir John and I had founded the Institute for Research on Pure Unlimited Love. Nice website if you want to Google it. And he wanted to understand not just human love, but he felt the love that made humans, or the ultimate reality of love. And I've gotten a fair amount of publicity over this in the years that ensued. They offered me a job here at Stony Brook in the medical school. I like teaching in medical schools. And they wanted me to teach compassionate care. And we've done very well. We've gotten a lot of awards nationally and so forth for that. So the first day I was here, I went into a pizza place. And the only newspaper on the rack in the foyer was the Three Village Herald. I'd never heard of it before, but it was a local paper. And all it had on the front page was a headline that said, "Unlimited love comes to Stony Brook." Now, this is a place full of big time scientists, Nobel Prize laureates, and I wondered how they would think about this. So what happened was the next morning, I called the president of the university, Shirley Kenny, who had recruited me from Cleveland, And I said, Shirley, I'm here, but did you see that newspaper article in the Three Village Herald? And she said, yeah, I did. She kind of laughed. And I said, well, did you get any response to it? She said, well, I got a lot of phone calls from emeritus professors. And I said, well, what did they ask you? And she said, well, they were mostly male professors. And they asked me, what kind of love are we talking about? So we both laughed for a few minutes. And, it turned out well. That was my origin story here at Stony Brook. It was challenging. I had to ride up the escalator in the middle of the medical school that afternoon. And I thought nobody knew me or knew what I looked like. But up at the top of the escalator was a guy with his arms folded, fairly burly. And he looked down and he said, are you Dr. Post? And I said, yes, I am. And he said, this is what he said, quote, are you going to save us? And I said, well, I'm not sure of that, but I'm happy to be here. And we became friends. But it was good to have that sort of spiritual piece in front of me because it meant that people were wondering all the time, what motivates him? And who is this guy from Cleveland? And I think that it was very fortuitous. I would call it synchronicity. And so from that very negative moment, okay, I mean, when uh, bad things happen to good people, I thought when that newspaper article was in front of me in that pizza place, it was the end of my stay at Stony Brook. I thought the world had collapsed. But it turned out as I came into this institution and I really nurtured people the best I could and started a program in compassionate care that really did well because that's what people want to know about and they want a toolkit for it and it's been really successful. So it all worked out, but I did have to build something from a negative moment. And that's what the reconciliation is. It is true that bad things do happen to good people. They happen to all people. And the secret is you can always expand the canvas and don't ever forget that. And that's what Carl Jung's idea of synchronicity is all about. When somehow, even in those difficult moments, the right person, as if sent by the Supreme, comes into your path and has the perfect idea, the perfect helping hand, the perfect guidance and perfect thing to say, and it just works out beautifully. So I'm a believer in um, synchronicity. Carl Jung said it feels like uncaused causality, capital U, capital C, not normal causality in sort of the daily sense of cause and effect, but that somehow in this universe, our individual minds are sufficiently connected with this one mind and with the minds of all so that these things are possible. They may not be happening every day, but they will happen. And our job is to notice them and to be grateful. So I'm very grateful. I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't like the cynicism, you know, of that message that bad things are always happen. They do happen to good. They happen to everybody because life is finite and we are mortal and we get ill and so forth. But in the end, resilience. I mean, this is really the core. Even the word namaste has a lot to do with this sort of inner essence of resilience. That if we work at it and are open to the divine, we can overcome. It's like, there's a great book by a Buddhist scholar from I guess from the Philippines called The Lotus and the Mud. I see your lotus symbol here. That the lotus comes out of the filth, out of the mud, and there it is in the early morning, shining bright in the sun, and it's a symbol of resilience, of purity, of love. And I do believe that that's how we need to see the challenges in our life as opportunities to blossom.
Sure, I think you have answered that question beautifully. Uh, Being good uh, does not make us immune to bad things happening in our life, but the overall effect is good because even when bad things happen, this good person is able to handle that situation much better. And in fact, if he is sufficiently advanced on the path on which he has been walking, then he can take them in a positive light, not just with equanimity, but with delight as something that has been given to him with a purpose. It's
Yeah,
it's how we respond to the bad things rather than the bad thing in itself, which is really significant in life.
yeah. So my
Yeah.
philosophy of life, I have no enemies. I don't know if the audience agrees with that. I don't believe in having enemies. I think that's a state of attitude on my part. But I have adversaries, and my adversaries are ultimately the people that the divine brings into my journey because they're there to bring out the best. They challenge me to do my best, to be my best, to get success. So I love my adversaries. And I think if you think of them as your enemies, you lose a certain amount of creativity and you get caught up in these ruminations and you point the finger and you say, if not for that person 15 years ago, whatever, I would be in a much better situation. I don't believe in that attitude. I've written about 20 articles. I have no history of addiction at all, or drug use or alcohol abuse, but I've written about 20 articles on AA and the 12 steps. And the fourth step in Alcoholics Anonymous is uh, to to recognize that even though there's someone we think was terrible and did something very bad to us, we have to ask ourselves reflectively, what did I contribute to that problem? Maybe I could have said something differently. Maybe I could have acted a little differently. And if I had, things might have been better. But anyway, they're not your enemies, they're your adversaries, so things will work out anyway.
It is a beautiful dictum to follow in life.
Oh,
I have
yes.
no enemies. Uh, Now, when you founded this Institute for Research on Unlimited Love, uh, it was a difficult undertaking because love has not been something considered to be amenable to research. And even if we say that, well, love has to be expressed and it's expressed by giving, giving is also something which doesn't seem amenable to research. But then you have broken it up into 10 ways in this book.
Mhm.
So, how did that evolve? And maybe you would like to dilate upon some of those ways, those 10 ways of giving, and especially those which are the most difficult to understand or which have been very difficult to subject to scientific research. And because so John Templeton, of course, I mean, one thread that goes is, underlying all the work that he supported is that he wanted a dialogue between science and religion, because many
Yes.
things which we take as axiomatic in religion or spirituality uh, are apparently beyond the scope of research, and the modern world demands scientific evidence. So, to sort of bridge that gap, this institution has played a very important role. So, maybe you would like to dilate in upon these things in whichever way you think would be best.
Okay, a little bit of a story then, quick. So it's about 2001, and I'm in my office at the medical school at Case Western. I was actually doing research on Alzheimer's genetics at the time, but people still understood my spiritual inclinations and why, ever since graduate school, even at the University of Chicago, I was writing about love. I wrote my dissertation there on love and the fulfillment of the giver, of the agent of love. So this is something that was a part of my journey. Sir John, he was too old at the time to email. He was beyond emailing, but he loved fax machines. He thought fax machines were the greatest invention ever. And he would fax me sometimes, I guess on average, maybe 4 or 5 times a day with some brilliant idea. And I had to respond to him. And I enjoyed that. So one day I got a fax from Sir John and it said, Stephen, we need to found an institute that will study the greatest human asset, which is love. But he said, not just human love, but the love that made humans, pure, unlimited love. And I did a bit of a double take and I faxed back, Sir John, maybe we should call it the Institute for Creative Altruism, because science is a little more comfortable with the word altruism. Sociologists study it, evolutionary biologists study group selection and altruism and all these things. So I faxed that, and then he faxed back. He said, "No, I think unlimited love, pure unlimited love, up to $9.2 million." And so I faxed back, Sir John, I love that language. It jumps right off the page. You'd have done the same thing. I think, Preeti, you would have done that too. So we had a great relationship, a very trusting relationship. And so I went ahead with that. And he was so right, because it's the love language that connects with the spiritual traditions. They have different words for this spiritual love, but it all works. And in fact, when I define love, I actually draw pretty heavily on the language of a psychiatrist from the University of Chicago. I'm really a Chicago product. And it's as follows. When the well-being and security of another is as real or meaningful to you as your own, and sometimes more so, you love that person. There's no ancient language, no Greek, no Latin, nothing like that. But it makes sense. It's commonsensical. So when I come to work in the morning, I'm asking myself, how can I love the people? I have a lot of people who work in my center and I head a division. So I encounter a lot of people every day, and it's iterated. It's a repeated encounter day after day, week after week. And I kind of know what's going on in their lives. So I can't approach my work day with the language of love, because people will think, that's pretty strange. But I can approach it with the 10 core expressions of love. So sometimes people are getting off track. I know they're doing things that are not consistent with their best selves. So I have to express what I call carefrontation, not confrontation. Carefrontation, a word that I got from M. Scott Peck, who was a great psychiatrist. He wrote a book called The Road Less Traveled. He was a dear friend. He'd gone to Case Western Medical School years before I got there, and he was practicing in Connecticut. But I was writing on love, and I was in Cleveland. He was in Groton, Connecticut, and we carried on a correspondence. And he wrote me a letter once, which I have in my shelf here. And he said, you need that sort of tough love. But, he said he didn't like the language of tough, and he didn't like the idea of confrontation. So how about carefrontation? And that's why there's a chapter in Why Good Things Happen to Good People called Carefrontation. And it's one of the 10 ways of love on the wheel of love. Now, not everybody needs that on any given day. So you have to really observe and be connected with folks and understand what expression of love might be most helpful to them. Some people need compassion. That's not the only expression of love, because it depends on your philosophy, but not everybody is obviously suffering. Now, again, you can take a different point of view than that. Maybe we're all suffering, we just don't like to acknowledge it. But if someone clinically, and I do a fair amount of clinical consulting, someone is suffering, you don't necessarily want to ask them directly, are you suffering? But you can ask them, this must be difficult. How are you handling it? And how are you coping? And what's really bothering you in here? And you can elicit statements from them. And compassion, by my definition, isn't just an inner feeling state, but it's really an emotional response to suffering in another human being, importantly, with the intention, even if it's not quite possible, but with the intention of relieving the source of that suffering or helping them to do that. So compassion is different than carefrontation. And just simple acts of helping. Oh, by the way, in the wheel of love, mirth is on the wheel. I'm a believer in mirth. I find myself utilizing uplifting, generous, kind, clean bits of humor over the course of the day, because when people are locked into this kind of morose state of mind, and by the way, there's so much political division now in the United States that not too many people are laughing. I want to make them laugh, not at anybody, but I want them to feel that they have that within their souls. And this is, by the way, obviously it's a big theme in Hinduism and Buddhism, the laughing Buddha. So when you forget how to laugh, you really forget how to live. So, the other day I was around a bunch of people who were just really looked so down and out, and very graciously, you have to know how to introduce this. I said, by the way, what do you do if you are agnostic, you have insomnia, and you are dyslectic? They didn't know what to say. And the answer I told them was, you're up all night wondering about the existence of dog. That's the dyslectic part, that, dog is God spelled backwards. So they all just cracked up. And I realized that in a single millisecond, just by a thoughtful use of mirth, not a long-winded joke, but I could bring them into a whole different state of being. And I think that opens individuals to the presence of the supreme being, as you speak of it, however people speak of it, and gives them a lot of relief from the anxiety and the protracted stress that they've been encountering over the course of a long day. So I believe that those are all equally important expressions of love. And in the morning, I meditate and I envision the people I know I'm going to encounter. By the way, this program we run, it got the Alpha Omega Alpha National Award for Professional Identity Development a few years ago, which is the best award you can get in medical education in the US. And it's because when they came here, they recognized that we had a whole community of individuals who were committed to truly compassionate care. Not that people are flawless, they have their off days, obviously. But, we've done pretty well with it. We have a lot of new techniques, OSCEs, interviews with patients that are monitored. We have meditational things. We send students to some yoga programs in California to come back and give us their toolkits. So it's been a lot of fun, and I love these people. I love the people here. I love people everywhere, and so I want. I don't want. I am in a sense a bioethicist. I was the senior editor of the Encyclopedia of Bioethics, 5 big volumes with Macmillan. That is the benchmark of the whole field. But one of the reasons I came here from Cleveland was because I thought that positive psychology and compassion were the things that we really need, more so than anything else. Because these quandaries, these questions, okay, do you use a feeding pig, percutaneous endoscopic gastrostomy, if you wish. Do you want to use that in a 90-year-old guy who has terminal dementia? I think the answer is probably no. Assisted oral feeding would be fine, but that's a question that philosophers debate in their sort of pointy-headed, hypercognitive fashion. But I don't think that's really what's core. What's core is to train clinicians who are compassionate and who know that there are more than negative emotions, getting to your earlier point, that are easily studied. Anger, fear, those things have been studied for a long, long time, and they're more discernible, even on PET scans. But things like kindness, mirth, generosity, forgiveness, yes, they're harder to study, but we're making some advances. We now know that when people are helping others with kindness, that's important, not because they're forced, but because they're inclined to it, that the mesolimbic pathway lights up. They're doling out dopamine, which is one of the four big happiness chemicals, and it also affects oxytocin levels. Oxytocin is a hormone that's known for social trust. So we're beginning to understand the sort of biology of, if you will, care and connection, and even evolution. So one of the reasons I accepted Sir John's invitation to start the Institute was because so much 20th century science was not good science. It was just completely cynical. Look at a book like The Selfish Gene. Even if you think you're being generous and kind, you better reassess, because you are just, by definition, the unwitting conduit or tool of a replicating DNA coil using you to foist itself into the future. Or you can look at primatology. When I was a boy growing up, when I was up at St. Paul's, we read these primatologists, and all non-human primates were vicious, vindictive, hateful, and incapable of empathy, let alone compassion. But then in the last 15 or 20 years, we've had wonderful researchers who actually get close to chimpanzees, like Jane Goodall, who won the Templeton Prize 2 years ago. She's a good friend. She's wonderful. But, she'll tell you that, in fact, we all have this primate capacity that's very primal within us. Attachment theorists in psychology will tell you that even young toddlers, this is the Yale Child Studies Center in New Haven, even those young toddlers, as long as you don't push all the wrong buttons, they do have this natural affective empathy. And that's the baseline of empathy. It's there from the get-go. We don't want to push the wrong buttons. Things can happen in their lives developmentally or environmentally that kind of shut some of this down and make them more likely to wind up needing counseling and even susceptible to midlife physical illnesses, like diabetes and the like. But, if you can nurture that, and I think the goal of every parent, that's why there's a chapter in Pure Unlimited Love, may you raise kind children. I have two kids. They're a little older now. They're not old, but they're older and mature. And I'm most grateful that they're both pretty kind. They have their off moments, but they're pretty kind. And so there's a lot of science that our institute funded, $4 million worth of it around 2001 with the Fetzer group in Michigan. What is the science for parents to think about when they want to raise kind children? And there are some tips for everybody in that chapter, which I'm not going to go into here. But I think that's what we want with our kids. And you think about the way children behave now, and so many of them, at least in our culture, they're really pretty desperate for meaning. They can be very violent for absolutely no reason, and on some of them are shockingly generous and benevolent and creative, and some of them are shockingly destructive. What's going on? So that chapter is about that, and I think that the supreme being, if you wish, who has those attributes, at least in the Ayurvedic literature, of kindness or love, freedom, and creativity. Our job as parents is to try to bring our children into that consciousness and that way of living. It's not always easy to do, and you've got a culture. Now you can Google AI psychosis. It's really an interesting thing to Google. I'm all for AI, but the guy who's called the father of AI, I met him at a Templeton annual meeting in Canada not too long ago. He's really worried. He quit Google over this. There's a great psychiatrist at University of California, San Francisco, who coined the term AI psychosis. Right now, there are on record 17 young people who, in their desperation for connection and meaning and purpose in life, they've gone to chat and they've asked for advice. They've revealed their hearts, shall we say, to AI. And the AI has some cognitive responses. Well, why don't you think about this? Why don't you think about that? But in the end, 17 of these young people killed themselves because what AI doesn't have is what that toddler has. And what hopefully most of us have, unless we're psychopaths, it has emotional empathy. It has love. And that's what you need. So it's that love that's key, and the sort of cognitive empathy where you can study, you can learn, you can role play. We do that all the time, teaching students to be reflective about what they say and when they say it and how they say it, and how they respond with patience. But some of them, leave the patients feeling that, well, it was nice, better than nothing, but it just feels kind of empty. Because where was their heart? And that's what I think we've been trying to do here, and it's worked out pretty well. So may you heal with kindness is the second chapter. The first chapter is may you give and glow. The second one is may you heal with kindness. The third one is may you follow your callings. We talked about that. The fourth one is may you wait a second. Yeah. May you know the one mind, and it goes on, and may you cherish the gift of nature. May you honor the spirit of freedom. And there's a lot of Hindu thought in this book. I'm sort of loosely speaking, an Episcopalian Christian, but I've always been very interested in Hindu thought. And I was asked to do a conference in Bangalore for the Indian Institute. This is now in 2015, so it's a while ago. And I write a lot about dementia. I don't like the word dementia. I talk about people as being deeply forgetful. So I think dementia is inherently demeaning. It's structured like the word retardation. We don't call people retards, but we talk about people with uh, different abilities, if you will. Um, uh, so for me, people with dementia are deeply forgetful, but if I call them demented, then I'm separating them from us, and I don't want to do that. So I refer to them as deeply forgetful. And I've written a book, Dignity for Deeply Forgetful People, that was the, Johns Hopkins bestseller last year. How caregivers can meet the challenges of Alzheimer's disease. And it's all about changing the language game and thinking about these individuals and noticing elements of continuity of identity. So we did a Gallup study. This is a little bit scientific, a Gallup national study of primary caregivers. And what we found out is that 90% of them can remember experiences when someone they thought was completely gone, chin down, not communicating, a husk, empty, a shell, that they were surprised because that individual would brighten up, sometimes sporadically, but sometimes stimulated by familiar music that they remember from earlier in life. The music and memory movement is a big deal. Sometimes by works of art, sometimes just by listening to a loved one singing to them. But they'll come back into themselves a bit. So that's what I mean by unexpected lucidity. And our NIH, the National Institute of Health, has a unit called the NIA, the National Institute on Aging. And due to the work I've been doing on this topic for many, many years, they actually put together what's called a request for proposals for leading scientists around the country to study what's going on neurologically in these moments of lucidity. Again, there are 10% of people who really react negatively because they'd rather know that grandma's not there and they don't really worry about her. But most people are excited because it inspires them to be more diligent and more continuous in their expression of love for grandma or grandpa or whomever, because grandma is not just a husk or not just a shell, but underneath the breakdown in communication is still there. So I have an African American mentor from Cleveland named Pastor Otis Moss. He runs a big African American church in the inner city. Originally from Detroit, and he was talking about his sister who passed away with dementia, and I called him and I said, while he was up there, I said, Pastor Moss, what do you think's going on with your sister right now? And he paused and said very slowly, he said, well, I'm not sure. I said, well, do you think she's gone? And then he said, well, I think she may be down at the Amtrak train station with one foot already on that train bound for glory. Now, that's an African American pastor who was once the chairman of the board of Morehouse College. And he's saying that. So he didn't think that she was gone. And that's why this idea of the one mind is so important to me, that people can have neurological challenges that can interfere with the function of their cognition, but they can still be there underneath it all. So when I was at Chicago, I studied with a wonderful neuroscientist by the name of John Eccles, who got the Nobel Prize. He was known as Sir John Eccles. And all the basics that we know about communication between brain cells, the synapses, and all that stuff, John Eccles discovered all that. He was a Roman Catholic. He was from Australia. He taught at Oxford. And I was fortunate enough to encounter him as a graduate student. And we got off a very, very good relationship. And he said to me, neuroscientists will come along and they will try to convince you that mind is just epiphenomenal. It's just derived from brain, from tissue, from cells. And he said, don't ever believe it, because no one's proved that. Now, there are, probably 12 interesting theories floating around from some of my neuroscience colleagues about how you could get mind from matter. But I've not been convinced by any of them, and neither are the philosophers of mind who are of significance. They're just not believing that. So somehow, as Hinduism and all the great spiritual traditions say, maybe mind precedes matter, right? Maybe matter is derived from mind. And I think that's the more plausible ontology, if you will. So yeah, I'm very happy. I've been very blessed, and I'm delighted to be able to speak with you wonderful people.
I'm so glad you mentioned it just a few minutes back about Sir John Eccles talking about what the neurophysiologists might try to convince us about, but in fact, with insufficient logic or evidence, that
Yeah,
brain is the generator of consciousness. In fact, I mean, as you said, I mean, the way we look upon it in the spiritual tradition, particularly the Hindu spiritual tradition, is that the brain is not the generator of consciousness, it is the channelizer of consciousness. It's an
absolutely.
instrument. It's an instrument that channelizes consciousness from a higher source, and the fraction that it channelizes is the one for which it has been built differently in different species, and that is what the brain does. And I think it's a very important point for all of us to grasp.
Yeah. So
George Bernard Shaw.
William James felt, the great American philosopher, and this is 100 years ago, he felt that there was this consciousness, there's one mind, and it utilizes the brain, and to some extent, he felt the heart to manifest in our lives. It's not the source of those things, but it's the conduit. And he even felt that the brain protected us in a way from full consciousness, because if we had total consciousness, we would be driven mad. So the brain limits our awareness to some extent of this ultimate reality. And otherwise we couldn't flourish. We couldn't even live. And that's where I think, there's this link between insanity and creativity. So for William James, who was at Harvard in those years, um, insanity is when you're just completely open to this infinite mind and you don't have any sense of self or self-control or even identity. Um, but mysticism is when you have that sense of openness, but you can control it. So, like a fish jumping out over the surface of the sea into the light and then coming back down, able to come back down. So that's the difference. Um, but yeah, the brain is not the source of mind, but it is the physical location of mind. Sorry, I didn't mean to go off on that, but it's important.
Yes, that's a very important point because even today, hardcore scientists have great difficulty in accepting that. Uh,
I've had a lot of hardcore scientists come to my door here. This is my office at the medical school. And they'll say, I wrote a book about synchronicity called God and Love on Route 80. It's about all my experiences in life with this synchronicity thing where you have an incredible feeling that, what's just encountered with you, it was meant to happen and wasn't from you as a source. It sort of invaded your journey. And that's guided me all my life, although I don't have those experiences regularly, but sometimes very powerfully. Um, and so they were coming into my office, um, and they were saying, don't tell anybody, but I've had those experiences too. And the best way to explain them is by thinking of a universal mind or universal consciousness that cherishes us and links us together a lot more than we often know. And I had experiences when I was 17, especially, that really locked that in for me. I went to Reed College in Portland, Oregon, uh, and by the way, Steve Jobs slept on my floor. And together we read the autobiography of a yogi, you'll be happy to know. And he lasted about a year there, and then he went off to India to study in an ashram. I never saw him again, but we were pretty close friends. And one late January night, it doesn't snow in Portland, Oregon. It's the Pacific Northwest. It can rain like crazy. And it was late at night. It was about, I guess, maybe 9 o'clock at night. And the rain was very heavy, and there was some slush on the ground. And I was sitting in the coffee shop with a bunch of friends, and some guy in a black jacket who looked pretty lit up, he came bounding into the coffee shop and he said, "Who wants to go for a ride on my Harley Davidson Shovelhead?" That was the fastest motorcycle of the time. And because I had so little executive function, I said, "I'll go." So I went out into the parking lot and I jumped on this bike with him. He was completely stoned. And again, I was not a drug user or a drinker. Uh, and and I realized I'd made a bit of a mistake because he took off. He hit 180 miles an hour through all the streets of Portland and going through all the stop signs, the red lights. He went out onto the Pacific Coast Highway, headed south for about an hour, and I was screaming and crying because I thought I was dead. He hit 200, and we were slipping around like, very unstable. And then he was laughing into the wind, and the rain was blowing across his red cheeks. And he did this incredible U-turn over the midway, came right back and dropped me off exactly where he picked me up in front of the coffee shop. And I stumbled my way across a bridge. There's a ravine to my dormitory. Now, I never picked up the payphone. They had payphones then, you may remember. Probably not, but they had payphones. And I never picked up the payphone, but I given my mother the number because I didn't want her to be completely out of communication, although largely so. So I walked across the threshold, and the telephone, the wall phone started to ring. I never answered that, but somehow I felt an urge, almost a push, to pick it up. And I picked it up and I said, "Hello." Now, mind you, it's 11 o'clock now in Oregon, and it's 2 o'clock in New York, where I was raised and where my mother was at that time. And she said, "Stevie, it's you. Thank God you're alive." And I said, "Mom, I feel the same way. Why are you saying that?" She said, "Well, I was asleep and I had this very powerful dream, and I dreamed that you were dead. And I was so nervous and so anxious, I just had to call you." And that's what she did. And I said, "Mom, it's incredible that you picked that up because you were 3,000 miles away with a couple of big mountain ranges betwixt and between." And uh, and I said, "Somehow you picked that up." And actually, we had a long conversation, and we both decided that night that we accepted the idea of a non-local mind. That's Deepak Chopra's term. I think it's also a broader term, but there's something non-local about mind. It's not just physically here, housed in the local brain, but it has a non-locality about it. And obviously, that's what happens. By the way, in neurology, there was a great neurologist in Germany named Berger, and his son in World War I was in the army, and he was thrown from a horse and died. And his daughter, Berger's daughter, had this incredible premonition that night that her brother had died. And that's what gave Berger the idea of brain waves. And so sometimes they're called alpha waves, but even now clinically, people talk about Berger waves. So the very idea that there can be brain waves came from this incredible premonitional experience. Now, how do you explain that if there isn't something non-local about mind?
So I think the work that you have done and the ideas that you uh, put across uh, it's just a matter of time, will eventually lead to a radical revision in in medical textbooks. Uh,
Mhm.
we already have the fight and flight reaction, the sympathoadrenal axis. But I think very soon we'll also have that, what you have called the compassion connect axis. That will
Yeah,
be
care
also
and
part of
connection.
the textbooks. And
Yeah.
so will this idea of non-local communication through the sort of universal field of consciousness. Larry Dossey has already foreseen it as the era 3 medicine, the medicine which will be based on this type of
Oh, yeah.
communication, which does not require any medium, and this instant, uh, unmitigated and unmediated communication through the universal consciousness, which could play a role in healing and can provide an explanation for faith healing and distance healing and so on. So I think it's just a matter of time. Very soon, I think we'll have a major revision in medical textbooks, and all these things will become a standard part of the armamentarium of doctors while they are
Yeah.
in the healing professions.
So I'm really happy you mentioned Larry Dossey, Dossey, who
Yes.
wrote, you know, he wrote a lot of great books. He's still alive. He lives in Santa Fe. He's quite feeble now and not terribly active, but he wrote the foreword to God and Love on Route 80. And in 3 or 4 pages, he generously articulated just about what you said. And, you know, there are Nobel Prize laureates like Schrödinger, Schrödinger's cat, and so forth. Schrödinger was the one who actually proved relativity because Einstein was actually like Ramanujan. He didn't think he had to prove anything, he just knew it was true. Um, and he was very mystical, you know, by the way. I mean, he would go into these states of mind. He called them Gedanke in German, just these states of consciousness. And then he'd come out of them and he'd have an idea, a theorem. And he wrote about this. But you know, I think you're so right. When we get to another era in medicine, these ideas about the profound nature of consciousness are going to be pivotal. And this is what Sir John hoped and prayed for. He hoped that it might take a century, it might take less or more, but he hoped that brain science would get to a point where it could understand these things. Now, you know, for Sir John and for me, facts are facts, but how we interpret those facts can differ. So if I'm a materialist, I'm going to take the same facts and I'm going to push them in one direction. And that's what most neurosciences are doing. But if I'm a non materialist, if I believe in the ontological reality of spiritual qualities and spiritual being, then I'm going to interpret those facts differently. And so Larry, in his book One Mind, is a great one, you know. That's the best book there is to read on this ever. And it's got lots of magnificent Hindu thinkers and Buddhist thinkers, but it's also scientifically elevated. And Larry is a great physician, was the head of medicine in many major hospitals in the southeast of the United States. So if you're going to read one book about this, read Larry's One Mind. And he's so generous because I just emailed him to write a blurb for God and Love on Route 80. And lo and behold, about 2 days later, I got this beautiful forward. And he said, why don't you use this as a forward? And I mean, it was hard for him to, I think, at that time in his life to write that, but he did. And I love Larry Dossey. Great guy.
Uh, Now that we have run out of time, would you like to give us some final message for the listeners, how they can sort of combine these two inseparable aims of life to have a sense of well-being yourself and to make the world a better place to live in?
Well, Why Good Things Happen to Good People is a nice little paperback that dwells on this. But more importantly, I think my more mature statement is pure unlimited love, science and the seven paths to inner peace. You know, I've written a lot of things, and so many of them really I don't feel have great value. Sorry to say that. I mean, I mean, Dignity for Deeply Forgetful People has a lot of value because it's really caught on with caregivers across the United States and even across the world. And half of them actually now are using the words deeply forgetful because it's more respectful and inclusive than dementia. Uh, and I'm proud of that, and I'm grateful. And it's also very much, I mean, the point there's a chapter, is grandma still there? Question mark. And I say you'd have to be totally arrogant to tell some little kid that no, she's gone. If you think she's there, you're just attributing that. No, but you just have to notice it. And that's Larry's term. You have to be a noticer. You have to notice the continuity of self-identity in these individuals. And you have to notice synchronicity in your own journey. So that's the key point. I call it hypercognitive philosophy. I'm not a hypercognitive thinker. And I gave a talk at Bangalore. There were about 200 Hindu neurologists and philosophers there. And I said, we Westerners, unfortunately, we think that moral value is based on linear rationality, the ability through reason to make plans and operationalize them. That's what John Locke and Immanuel Kant said constitutes personhood. I said, that's awfully narrow because I have times when I don't think I'm very linear. But we always have symbolic rationality. I knew a guy who was deeply demented, forgetful, and he always clutched his cowboy hat, and he wouldn't even separate from it when it was shower time. We had to wring it out at night. And it turns out that he was working in the steel mills on the west side of Cleveland, and he always dressed country and western. And somehow he knew that that cowboy hat was locked up as a symbol of his life and of who he was. That's sometimes called object relations. And so there's a lot of symbolic rationality. And that's why religion and spiritual care can be so helpful for people who are very deeply forgetful. You can bring them out of that distance closer to communication, and you can even elicit these moments of lucidity in them by manipulating symbols. So I'm a big, and music is part of that too. So I'm a believer in it. But I really, so just to leave you with this idea that, in the future, I agree with Ramesh that we should get to a point where this is not strange, but rather understood and accepted and part of our language and our textbooks and not foreign to consciousness. But anyway, when I was in Bangalore, just to say this, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who wrote a foreword to Pure Unlimited Love, a beautiful foreword. And he actually showed up in the back of this speaking hall, this conference center. There was a little shuffling in the back. And I had just said, there's no reason to love somebody less because they were deeply forgetful. That's not relevant. Their linear rationality is not relevant to how we think of them ethically and respect them ethically. And I said, that's a Western abnormality. And so he stood up and he put his hand down on the desk and he said, "You're absolutely right. We can honor people who are forgetful just as we honor people who are not, because they still have consciousness. They can still enjoy the color of the fall leaves. They can still appreciate the smell of home cooking that they recognize from their childhood. They have tactile sensibilities." So he understood that. And since then, we've been pretty good friends. In fact, on my wall over there is a beautiful written letter from His Holiness And he eventually did get the Templeton Prize, which I must say I helped happen. So, this idea that mind is more than matter, it's so ancient. All the great spiritual traditions acknowledge this, but somehow or another that's been reversed. But even Darwin, toward the end of his life, didn't think that mind could come from matter. He thought it was an exception area. And I believe that we're going to get there. And if I've been in some small way able to facilitate in this regard, I'm very grateful.
Yes, we have to be grateful for being able to contribute whatever little bit each one of us can individually to this major leap in evolution, as Sri Aurobindo has called it. So with that, I would like to thank you once again for being with us. We hope to have you soon again to dilate
Sure.
upon each of these ways and paths that you have come up with in these two exceptional books. And still better, we would look forward to seeing you in India, and do make a visit to New Delhi, where I'm stationed, where I'm based, and to be a joy to host you in the ashram where I live. And
Well, if there's a way to get to New Delhi, I'd probably take a trip and look you up for sure. Okay, thank you for having me. Have a wonderful evening. It's probably getting close to bedtime.
Thank you so much, both of you, for this enlightening session. And Stephen, sir, thank you so much for sharing your deep wisdom. And we are truly grateful learning from your wisdom and sharings from your life experiences. Thank you so much.
Okay, I wish you all well.
So
Thank
before
you.
we close today's session, let me quickly inform that the recording of today's session and all guest talks are published on our YouTube channel, Yes Spirituality. You can visit the channel and explore extensive content on yoga, education, spirituality.
Can you send me that link?
Of course, just
Okay, great. I'd love to have it. Okay, it's an honor, total honor.
thank you everyone for joining in today. We'll close today's session now with a peaceful silence. Namaste.
Okay.